So good morning, everyone. My name is City Councilor Lodge Michael Flaherty, Vice Chair of the Committee on Government Operations. And we are here today to discuss Docket 1041. That is an ordinance amending City of Boston Code Ordinances, Chapter 6, Section 6-10, Language and Communication Access for City Services, sponsored by our colleague, Juliet Mejia. Today's session features simultaneous translation in Cantonese. If you are in need of translation, please click the interpretation button at the bottom and select Cantonese. Also, before we discuss the proposed ordinance, I have to read some procedural information into the record, and it says following: in accordance with Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 executive order modifying certain requirements of the open meeting law and relieving public bodies of certain requirements, including the requirement that public bodies conduct its meetings in a public space that is open and physically accessible to the public. The City Council will be conducting this hearing virtually via Zoom. This enables the City Council to carry out its responsibilities while adhering to the public health accommodations and ensuring public access to its deliberations through adequate alternative means. The public may watch this meeting via live stream at www.boston.gov/city-council-tv. It will also be rebroadcast at a later date on Comcast 8, RCN 82, and Verizon 1964. For public testimony, written comments may be sent to the committee email at ccc.go@boston.gov and will also be made part of the record and available to all members of the council. We will take verbal public testimony at the end of this hearing. If you have not had an opportunity to do so, you can email Christine O'Donnell to request a Zoom link that will have your name added to the public testimony list. And we would encourage you to do so now by emailing Christine at christine.o'donnell@boston.gov. That said, this proposal, Docket 1041, would amend the current language in Communication Ordinance, Chapter 6, Section 6-10, by expanding upon the original objectives of the ordinance and making city programs, benefits, and services more accessible by offering translation or interpretation services for residents who may have a disability, are English language learners, or limited English speakers. Some may remember the City Council and Mayor had approved the current ordinance back in 2016, where our colleague, City Councilor Michelle Wu, who is on this Zoom as well as our former colleague, City Councilor Tim McCarthy, had co-sponsored this proposal back in 2016 that ultimately became the current law. As previously stated, this proposal would expand upon the current ordinance by codifying the Office of Language and Communication Access, hereinafter referred to as the office, which shall be under the charge of a director. The office will serve as the main contact for language and communication access services and plans with the city departments. The proposal would require the office to work with the community to develop guidelines that reflect culturally competent interpretation and translation in order to provide a list of standards when contracting for interpretation or translation services. This proposal also amends the definition section by adding new terms such as, quote, plain language, end quote, quote, cultural competence, end quote, quote, adult literacy, end quote, quote, alternative communication, end quote, and, quote, universal design for learning, end quote, in order to provide increased accessibility to maximize participation. This proposal would also require signage about interpretation services, including using symbols to accommodate those that cannot read. The proposal strengthens data and reporting requirements of the translation request through the establishment of a centralized online dashboard that will publish usage in data requests and require departments to share the data with the office. The proposal also changes the translation section to require that vital documents be translated into languages spoken by 5% of the population of the City of Boston, or by 1,000 persons, whichever is lesser, otherwise known as the most commonly used languages. This is a change from the current ordinance, which imposes this requirement on city departments that receive federal assistance. The current ordinance requires that vital documents be translated in Spanish, Haitian, Creole, Chinese, Vietnamese, and Cape Verdean. Before I turn it over to the lead sponsor and my colleagues for brief opening remarks, I want to thank the panelists for joining us this morning. From the administration, we have Jennifer Viva Wong, Interim Director of Mayor's Office of Language and Communication Access. We have An Lei, Senior Policy Advisor, Mayor's Office of Immigrant Advancement, and Jessica Doonan, Chief of Staff, Mayor's Commission for Persons with Disabilities. Our second panel, we have Ivan Espinoza Madrigal, Executive Director of Lawyers for Civil Rights, Narda Campusano Horton, Senior Manager for the Office of Court Interpreter Services. She may be joining by phone. We're just trying to confirm that. Maran Urate, Professor of UMass Boston Gambone Institute. Carolyn Chow, Director, Asian American Resource Workshop, and Howell Washington, Community Activist. So thank all of the panelists on behalf of the council and lead sponsor for joining us today and for sharing your time, talents, and experience with us. And I will now turn it over to the lead sponsor, my colleague, and someone that has done a lot of work in this space and has made significant recommendations to further the initial ordinance that we had passed in 2016 to strengthen it and to make it more inclusive. That's Juliet Mejia. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Michael, for hosting this hearing. Really do appreciate you stepping in to do so. Would like to just take a brief moment to wish Councilor Edwards and her family well and to send them our love and support during this time. I also want to thank Councilor Flaherty for stepping in as Vice Chair and agreeing to continue with this hearing. And I really do appreciate Councilor Wu and former Councilor McCarthy for leading the charge and getting us here. And we're looking forward to taking this work to another level given these times. For those, this is going to be a little bit long, but I just really want to flush all of this out, but just indulge me. For those who have been following my journey, you know my story. I was the official translator in my neighborhood and experienced firsthand how much work there is to do to make our city's language access infrastructure more accountable and accessible. In 2016, the City of Boston passed a language access ordinance. 4 years have passed, and especially in light of COVID-19 pandemic, there's a good reason to take a closer look at that ordinance and see how we can improve upon it. That's what our amended ordinance does. For those who are listening, here's a brief summary of the changes we have made to the ordinance. This ordinance formally establishes the Office of Language Access and Communication. This office was not originally written into the law and could be changed without the consent of the City Council. By writing this office into law, we have the opportunity to make it more accountable to the people by requiring the office meet with constituents more regularly. This ordinance expands the number of languages that the city must provide translation services to. Any language that is spoken by 5% of the population or 1,000, whichever is less, must be able to access vital documents. This includes languages like Somali, Arabic, Russian, Italian, and more. Originally, if a department was not able to translate a document, they were simply to say, sorry, please have this document translated or call 311. This ordinance requires agencies to translate documents. We're the City of Boston and we can figure out how to translate a document. We have inserted plain language and cultural competency clauses requiring any interpretation or translation to avoid overly complicated language that would confuse people. In the case of social distancing and flattening the curve, those are things that most of us had to Google just so that we can understand. So this is an opportunity for us to speak in ways that people can actually understand and access. This ordinance, we are providing more accessible services for those who cannot read or write in their own language by encouraging text-to-speech technology, as well as the use of symbols, such as national languages. As you know, I talk a lot about adult literacy. My mom didn't even finish 4th grade. So I know there are a lot of folks who come to this country with interrupted education, and many of which don't know how to read or write in their own native language. And I think it's important for us to do what we can to ensure that people can understand. I also would just like to give a quick shout out and lots of gratitude to Counselor Flynn, who in every single hearing that I participated in, he always goes to bat for immigrant communities and making sure that their voices and their needs are being heard in front and center. So Counselor Flynn, I really do appreciate how much, how hard you work for those that you serve. Thank you for that. And thank you for allowing me to speak a little bit more than I normally would, which you all know I do talk a lot. But I wanted to outline some of the major changes in that this ordinance hopes to make. I welcome any questions or challenges and hope that we can all work collaboratively to uplift the needs of the non-English speaking community. And I want to thank my colleagues who are here joining us today for your participation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Councilor Mejia. We've been joined by our colleagues, Kenzie Bach, Councilor Ed Flynn, Councilor Michelle Wu, Councilor Anissa Rasavi George, and Councilor Liz Braden. I don't see any others. And I just would like to take chair prerogative, at least for the opening, to allow, as a professional courtesy, our colleague, Councilor Michelle Wu, who was the lead co-sponsor on the original ordinance, just to give some opening remarks. And then we'll go from that point on from order of arrival, which will be Councilor Bach, Councilor Flynn, Councilor Rasavi George, Councilor Braden for brief openings, and then we'll get right into the panel. Councilor Wu.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much to the lead sponsor. I think maybe Councilor Flaherty might be the only one on this group to remember what it was like the first go round, but it was multiple, actually almost 2 years of conversations and pushing, and we had actually been reviving an effort that was started even several years before then and kind of dropped. So it is just amazing to see where we are today and to recognize just how much more work there is still to do. So this is an issue that's also very personal for me. And I know from having worked on some of the language before that much of this will also be about implementation. So I'm really grateful to have folks from the administration here who can help walk us through how it's gone so far, what the resource challenges might be, because we need to focus on not just pushing through the changes that Councilor Mejia has written and suggested, but also the funding and the willpower and the organizational resources behind making sure that this actually serves residents day to day and doesn't just live, as lines in the municipal code. So I'm really excited to see this continue even more. And as the lead sponsor mentioned, it is so important, especially in this moment for the city. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilor Wu. Councilor Kenzie Bach.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to add my thanks to the lead sponsor for raising this and to all the councilors on the call, especially Councilor Wu and Councilor Flynn for past work on this issue. I came to the council, as folks know, from the Boston Housing Authority. And there I worked very closely with the folks running our Office of Language Access. And so I saw firsthand what it looks like for a large agency to really take this work seriously. And at the Housing Authority, that was a turnaround over 10 years from having actually had a lawsuit because of the lack of language access. And so, but now there are so many things that are just kind of normal about language access at the BHA. And I was a bit surprised when I came to City Hall in this role to just find the number of ways in which our city departments are still not able to be accessible in the way that we are over at the Housing Authority. And so to me, it's really important. I think Councilor Wu is exactly right. It's a lot of like boring institutional process stuff to get this right. But when you get it right, it becomes like clockwork. It becomes part of your organization. And it is so vital for all of our families. And I think COVID has heightened the recognition that so many of the services that the city provides are essential to people, and they need to be accessible to the wide variety of Bostonians who speak a really wide variety of languages. So I'm excited about this work, and yeah, thank you so much for chairing, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilor Bach. Councilor Ed Flynn.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. I also want to say thank you to Councilor Wu for her past work on this important issue, and Tim McCarthy, former Councilor Tim McCarthy as well, want to say thank you to the lead sponsor, Councilor Mejia, for putting forth this ordinance, and to Council Flaherty, as I mentioned. I think it's important that we continue to talk about how we can improve existing city ordinances, especially an important one like language access, communication access. Language access is a top priority for me since I took office. I represent a large immigrant community, and many of them do not speak English. I see firsthand how important it is to have a robust language and communication access resources for our constituents. Quality interpretation and translation services are critical for our constituents to participate fully in our government. It's difficult to do. It takes time. It takes money. There's a lot of room for improvement on this issue to provide translation interpretation services. For example, in the school committee meeting last week, interpretation was only provided during the public comment period. And my constituents from Chinatown who are on this call and that will probably testify were not able to follow the meeting and hear about important information provided in the meeting by the superintendent, by the mayor, and by others, because those parts of the meeting were not translated. This was very disappointing for me, but more importantly, it was very disappointing for my constituents who sat there for several hours and didn't know or understand what was happening. I talked to the mayor's office, I talked to the superintendent as well, and I know that situation will never happen again. There are also many instances where important documents were not translated in a timely manner when they are released, leaving my constituents not fully able to understand proposed plans until only days before a vote or implementation of a city program. So I'm glad we are having this conversation today. I know we can straighten and improve our current language access and resources. This issue will never be done. It's going to continue to take all of our efforts, and I encourage my city councilors, if we are serious about this issue, we have to fight for it during the budget process. We can't just offer speeches and then forget about it and then offer speeches again next year. We have to advocate during the budget process for language access services for all of the residents of Boston. Again, thank you, Councilor Mejia. Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. And thank you to the Mayor's Office of Language Access for their important work on this issue.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. Chair recognizes Councilor Anissa Asabi-George.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty, and thank you to the lead sponsor on this issue, as well as the leadership of Councilor Wu and Councilor Flaherty on this previously. I think colleagues have mentioned sort of the important reasons why we're here and the important work that has been left undone that we need to focus on as a council for the benefit and access of all of our residents across the city. So happy to be here, happy to continue this conversation and be a part of it, and look forward to the rest of today's hearing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor. Chair recognizes Councilor Liz Braden.
Thank you, Councillor Flaherty. I also want to thank Councillor Wu and Councillor McCarthy for their previous work on this really, really important issue. And kudos to my colleague, Councillor Mejia, for taking this on and working to bring it up to a new level so that all of our city departments have language access and cultural competencies to deal with the diverse and wonderful population of our wonderful city, Boston. Language access is critical so that our residents can access city services, can get the best possible benefits from our schools, our community services, etc. And I think we should be setting the standard for language access in Boston. So thank you so much. I really look forward to hearing the panelists and moving to advance this important work. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Braden. And Chair recognizes, just joining us, is City Councilor Matt O'Malley. Good morning, Matt.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, colleagues and friends. I will be brief because it has been said far more eloquently than I can articulate, but I did just want to say, a lot of times I think correctly, elected officials are gently criticized for spending so much time thanking each other, but in this case, it really is important. So thank you, of course, to Councilor Mejia for convening us here today. Thank you to Councilor Wu for her great work in this space ahead of time alongside Councilor McCarthy. And I also wanted to acknowledge Ed Flynn, who has really made this such an important part of his work and his time on the body. And I think it underscores what an important issue this is and how incredibly relevant this conversation is as we find ourselves amid pandemic, where so much of what we have to do our jobs well is simply get information out to people. There is so much happening. We want to obviously do what we can to make sure that all people of Boston are safe during these challenging times, and being able to do so with acute cultural competency, being able to do so with as many accurate translation and transliteration services as possible is what we strive to do each and every day. So this is a really important issue because it really drives so much of what we need to do to provide a safe, thriving city for all. And I'm delighted to add my voice to the chorus of support. So looking forward to continuing to get to work. Thank you again to the makers for their great, important leadership in this space.
Thank you very much, Councilor O'Malley. Seeing no other additional colleagues on, I'd like to, we have two panels, so I'm going to go to the panels both first, and then we'll get into questions. I know that we have a couple of the panelists have some time sensitivities, and I know that we also have public testimony as well. So I'm going to ask from the administration, Jennifer Viva Wong, An Lei, and Jessica Dunan in that order to introduce themselves as part of the administration panel. And if all three would like to speak, or one speaking on behalf of the group, it's your preference, but I would love to hear from you. And then we're going to shift to the second panel, and then we'll get into questions. So I'll turn it over at this point to Jennifer Viva Wong. Good morning, Jennifer.
Good morning, Councilor Flaherty. Good morning. My name is Jennifer, and I am the Interim Director for the Mayor's Office of Language and Communications Access. And I'll allow An and Jess to introduce themselves, but I did prepare a slideshow, just an overview of what our office does, if there's time as well.
Sure. And An Lei.
Good morning, An Lei, Senior Policy Advisor for the Mayor's Office for Immigrant Advancement.
Yes, sir.
Good morning, everyone. Jessica Dunan, Chief of Staff for the Mayor's Commission for Persons with Disabilities.
Very good. So I'd obviously love to get your thoughts on the ordinance and specifically the amendments and changes to the ordinance. And if that takes the form of a brief presentation, that's fine. Or I'll defer to you, Jennifer.
I can be very brief if it's okay with the other counselors. It's just an overview of our office.
Sure.
So I will present my screen. Is everyone able to see this okay?
Yes, we can. And Kerry, if there's any issues on your end, just let me know.
Excuse me, sorry, Chair Flaherty. I don't want to disrupt the situation, but we do have panelists who have hard stops. So we were very clear about some of that, and I'm not sure if you got the message.
Yes, yeah, I just recognize that. So there's going to be a brief presentation, then we're going to go right to the two that have time sensitivities.
Okay, perfect. So just an overview of our office, and I will be mindful of the time. The mission of our office is to ensure that all city programs, services, and activities are meaningful to all Bostonians. And so we prioritize two main groups: people who identify as speaking a language other than English, and persons with a disability. From our current data from 2020, in Boston, there's over 644 residents. And out of that, 84,000 plus residents identify as having a disability, and over 245,000 residents identify as speaking a language other than English at home. And so what we do in our office is that to ensure that language and communications access is a priority, we provide guidance to other city departments regarding language and communications access. We develop trainings, resources, and protocols for departments to follow. We also provide funding to departments and oversee the entire payment process for any invoices. And we work to communicate and collaborate with community-based organizations and community members. And we also have research and data analysis that is related to evaluating the language and communications access needs of Bostonians in the city. And then within within departments, there are LCA liaisons that are the go-to point person in departments that have the knowledge regarding language and communications access, which staff members can go to for information. And then just a quick how to request LCA accommodations. Constituents can contact the city department providing that service, whether it be an event or a document. And then I will now stop sharing my screen. Sorry, I hope that was brief.
Thank you, Jennifer. I do appreciate you being brief and being mindful. Thank you.
Good. So if this, after the administration panel, unless Ann Lee or Jessica have anything additional to that, we're going to shift now to the panel, second panel. Ann Lee and Jessica, you guys good with that? Okay. So now, and I know we have time sensitivities from Ivan Espinoza. Let me just find out my sheet here. So Ivan Espinoza, Mad Grial, and also Hau Wasami. So we're gonna, in addition to that panel, we also have Miran Uriate, and please, if I'm pronouncing, please correct me so that I have the correct and appropriate spelling, so that you're shown the proper respect. Carolyn Chow, as well as Narda Kimpensano Horton. So I'll lead off with Ivan. If you'd be kind enough, you have the floor. And good to see you, Ivan.
Thank you very much, Counselor, and thank you for also inviting me to say the pronunciation of my name, which is Ivan. Thank you. An appropriate opportunity to do that, considering the language access issues that we're discussing. So I appreciate that, Counselor. And I would also like to pay my respects to the rest of the city councilors who are present, whose leadership I very much support. Thank you. Thank you for all your work. And I want to just briefly thank also Councilor Mejia for sharing her personal story of serving as a translator, which I can also attest to. I think that is the role that many of us in immigrant families have to play. So let me begin by saying that my name is Ivan Espinoza Madrigal. I'm the Executive Director of Lawyers for Civil Rights. It is our pleasure to be here today to support this important legislation and to applaud the establishment of the Office of Language and Communications Access. This office is critical, and I will share just a handful of anecdotes to illustrate this. This is the type of office that can make a deep impact in the lived experience of people in our city. Just taking the pandemic, for example, at the very beginning of the pandemic in March, April, as the economy was being affected, many workers whose primary language was not English were not able to apply to unemployment assistance because the platform was only available in English. Our organization did a lot of work with the Commonwealth to make sure that the platform was translated so that people would not be deprived of those services. That's a state example, but we also have city examples, some of which were already articulated by Councillor Flynn, so thank you for that. One really powerful example involves Suffolk Downs, where my organization filed a complaint pursuant to Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits discrimination on account of race, color, and national origin. We filed a Title VI complaint because groups such as Green Roots and City Life Vida Urbana we're not able to receive enough support and opportunities for weighing in on critical development projects such as Suffolk Downs, which would have an impact on climate issues, on housing, on gentrification and affordability. And so that complaint, which we applaud the city for quickly resolving through a voluntary consent decree, a voluntary compliance agreement, now establishes for widespread language access practices and uniformity within the agency's practices. And so what we're talking about here today is really an extension of work that the city has already done, but in a piecemeal basis, maybe with respect to this agency, or maybe with respect to this project. But the powerful part of what you're considering this morning is that this office would be able to do things like a language access audit across city agencies and practices to ensure uniformity, to make sure that nobody falls through the cracks, to make sure that we are not placing people in situations where they're being deprived of a particular application, of a service, of a process, based on the fact that it's English only. There's no excuse for that, particularly during COVID, during the racial justice crisis, during the economic crisis that we're facing. And so for us, the way that we see this at Lawyers for Civil Rights is that this is an issue of injury, indignity, and stigma of linguistic exclusion. And so it has that on top of the Title VI discrimination implications that I mentioned. And so for me, it is a pleasure to be here to support this effort to make Boston responsive to its rapidly diversifying communities and to make Boston a 21st century city. I applaud this effort and the leadership of each of you involved in this effort.
Thank you very much, Yvonne, for joining us. And in that spirit, it was just brought to my attention from the interpreter that is providing services today that she's asking all of us to just slow it down a little bit so that she can do her job and keep the constituents that are on this call and Cantonese-speaking individuals abreast as we progress through the hearing. So appreciate that. And I know in the same term, Hewu Wasami, who's a community advocate, also has a time sensitivity. So thank you for joining us and for being here. You have the floor. And again, please, if I'm mispronouncing, please correct me.
Hawa, you're on mute.
Hawa Wasami. You're with us. You have the floor. Hawa Wasami.
Good morning, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to be part of this event. I'm members of the Boston City Council. My name is Hawa Wasami, and I am Boston resident, parent of Boston Public Schools, and English is not my first language. I am here to express my support for this amendment and any opportunities to provide language access for Boston residents. I believe all Bostonians should have meaningful access to services offered by the city. I am Boston residents. I believe all Boston residents should have a meaningful access services offered by the city. I am supporting the idea of establishing the Office of Language and Communication Access. Creating a permanent office and its leadership will help more work to be done without worrying if the future administration will eliminate the office. Language access is key to accessing the services that a city provides for many immigrant communities that have limited English proficiency. They miss out on readily available services, supports that Boston offers because of not enough English, but not knowing the enough English. However, many of these people can read and write their native languages. So the city or the agencies should communicate with that language that they can understand. Not knowing what's available in this Not knowing what's available is the first hurdle, is the first huge barrier. The services that are pose biggest hurdle include housing, healthcare, legal services, access to mental health, and or social services. After all, they are taxpayers of this great city. Understanding government system and how to take part in a civil engagement and voting is essential to all of us. However, suppose the information that you are getting from the city is either limited or it's a language that you don't understand. In that case, that will not benefit from the information that you're getting from the community, from the city. Let me tell you a story about happened to me when I was a teenager. I was new to the United States and did not speak English. While I was receiving support from the government, I was also determined to be independent. I started working, looking for jobs. And when I finally found one, I failed to inform my caseworker. Little that I know, I already signed a document that required me to report any wages that I have earned. Because the form was English, I did not understand what I had signed. I remember the day when my roommate called me from work, and she was scared and told me that there was 3 policemen in front of my door looking for me, who had my ID, my name, and was asking my friend where I was. It was terrifying experience. I didn't understand what I have done, and I had to leave work from 2 hours away from where I need to be. And I was shaking, I was terrified, and coming from a country where you could be jailed for anything was a very difficult situation to be in. I eventually got home and I get a card where they left me to come to the building. And I walked to the building shaking, scared, and not know what to expect. I eventually found the 3 guys who were looking for me. And without interpretation, they told me that I commit a crime that I did not understand. And I eventually come to understand that what I have signed was a problem. And eventually I have to pay back whatever I have taken from the government. That memory have stayed with me for the rest of my life. And I think it's very important for us to service Boston residents and allow them to have a document that they can understand so they can get services they deserve and be inclusive in the community they live. Thank you for allowing me to be here, and thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Hawu. And is Carolyn Chow, is she still on with us, Carolyn?
Yep, I'm here.
Good morning, Carolyn.
Thanks, Councilor Flaherty. And thank you, Councilor Mejia and Councilor Wu and everyone who's worked on this over the years. Is it okay for me to jump in?
Yes, it is. Thank you, Carolyn.
So my name is Carolyn Chu. I'm the Executive Director of the Asian American Resource Workshop, and I'm here on behalf of the whole Asian Pacific Islander Civic Action Network Coalition. We work across the state to advance the interests of Asian Pacific Islander American communities by promoting a shared agenda to further equity and through year-round civic action. Our steering committee includes me, the Chinese Progressive Association, Viet Aid, Asian Community Development Corporation, and Cambodian Mutual Assistance Association in Lowell. And so for us, we see language access as so critical, both in the city and across the state of Massachusetts. And we're certainly lucky that Boston has been a leader on this, but there's so much more to do. And so really appreciate Councilor Mejia for bringing us all together. I guess for us and for me, I would just say that, as we look to improve and codify language access in the department, to really think about language access from start to finish of everyone's experience with the city and city departments. So, not just doing the initial notices in 10 languages, but actually, if we're going to do that, can we do the whole process in language? So one example I have just briefly on that is, with the City Rental Relief Fund, which was so important, and we're excited the second round is up. The pre-application was in, I believe, 10 languages, I'm not sure. And we had a resident in Fields Corner where I work and live who did the pre-application in Vietnamese, but then when they were selected, there was no one available to do Vietnamese to do the whole process with them in Vietnamese, which meant we were then paying our small team of staff to actually to walk them through the application and then parallel to the city process. And so really just thinking, how do we hold folks from any notices through meetings, through processes, and really making sure that the whole system is in the languages that we've identified. And even at that first step, we find specifically for Asian language speakers, but I would say for most language speakers that are not English, Spanish, that the automated systems often don't even ask. Like, it takes so much effort to even get to the point where you can get a callback in language that folks are not able to even go through the automated steps. And so, just to raise that at every step, there are barriers. And then with interpretation at meetings, I would just say, I think it's really important that BPS and BPDA are included in our assessment of language access. We know that's a lot of the meetings our folks are trying to go to and are so critical to our folks, and that with all interpretation, especially as we go to Zoom, I think really looking to best practices about having like 2 interpreters to manage the technical barriers, as well as making sure folks have adequate prep time, given that some of these meetings involve quite technical language that, as the interpreter, you might not even be familiar with the terms. And then also making sure that everything is in addition translated and shared with folks in language written. I think, as Councilor Mejia has mentioned, I think it's really important that we don't assume everyone has the same level of ability to read, but for those who can, it's really important that we're doing the verbal and the written. And then I just had like 2 more things. I think that just to emphasize that for many of us, because of the barriers in the system start to finish, as well as just the barriers to even get through the first call in language, it really ends up putting a lot of responsibility on under-resourced small community organizations. Here in Boston, in the Asian community, we're really lucky to have the Asian Outreach Unit at Greater Boston Legal Service, but they are a small team that ends up managing a lot of folks' needs around just navigating systems. And so, I think it's really important that we try to make it as easy as possible for folks to get a call back in the right language or get the initial information in the right language, and then see as many processes through as possible. So we have other suggestions, but I think it's really exciting that this is happening, to really review what's happening across the departments to try to standardize, codify, and think about all the languages we need. As a Dorchester resident, we do a lot of our work both Indian as well as Cape Verdean Creole, Spanish, Haitian Creole. And we know that it's hard to do many, many languages, but so critical to making sure our folks' voices are at the table. And yeah, we look forward to continuing to talk about the more the finer details, but we think this is a really important step. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Carolyn, for your testimony and also for the work that you do. And then Kerry, I just want to double check to see, we're expecting potentially a call from our next guest, Narda Campusano Horton. She was going to try to join by phone, so I don't know if she's on the line or not, Kerry.
I don't see that person there. If I do, I'll definitely enable them to speak.
That'd be great, please. I don't see Nada on the screen as well, so I just wanted to confirm. I know that she was going to make best efforts. She's the senior manager of the Office of the Court Interpretive Services, so very important.
She's joining now.
Very good. So that'd be great. So we'll give Nada a minute to join us. Nada, if you can hear us. Good morning, Nada, and thank you for joining us. And it's City Councilor at Large Michael Flaherty, and you're currently a panelist right now on a Zoom with the members of the Boston City Council to speak about this ordinance. So we'd love to get your thoughts and concerns, and appreciate the work that you do.
Well, thank you. I want to join phone. I think, and I commend the city of Boston for doing what you're doing with regards to access. I know for me as a senior manager for the Office of Court Interpreter Services, and having been an interpreter in one of the busiest courts in the state, which is the Essex County, I know that language access in the city of Boston is not always, it has been always that fluent. From the court perspective, it is a task to recruit interpreters who are professionals and master the language for the court system. So for the purposes of cities and schools, hospital and to language speakers, that as we move forward, and your team moves forward with what you're trying to accomplish, is that to keep in mind a few things. And the most important one that I will make you aware, and I know you know, is finances. Yes, it is costly to provide language access. Yes, it is costly to have phones translated properly. And my interpreters are fluent in the language. However, it is a responsibility to do so. So, resources, but it is important that we keep in mind who is it that we're serving. The goal of the language access plan of the trial court, and I'm sure the city, is to place the non-English speaker same level of the English speaker. We can do that if we invest the necessary resources in making sure that we get qualified interpreters to do this, qualified translators to do this. And not everyone that speaks another language can be an interpreter or a translator. It requires skills and preparation to purposes that the community requires will require time. Having me on in this meeting. If there's anything that I can assist you with
So Nada, so you were sort of in and out there a little bit. We got a good chunk of what you were suggesting. So obviously first, the thank you for the work that you do. And I know firsthand that if it wasn't for our court interpreters, courts daily would come to a grinding halt. But I did hear you say that it's really important in terms of the quality of the interpreter, having the ability, to be able to interpret effectively. And you also talked about, the need in terms of the constituency base that is being serviced and how important it is to have good interpreters to do that.
Yes,
And
yes.
we talked a little bit about maybe the financial piece of it as well. So I know that the lead sponsor may have a question, Julia Mejia, who had invited you. So Julie, do you have any questions of Narda? I know it was broken up a little bit, parts of it.
Sure.
Yes, Michael, thank you again. I had a hard time, Narda, hearing you, so I'm sorry for that bad connection. I'm going to try to do my best in terms of asking you very specific questions, but I'm just curious, can you talk a little bit about the training process for court interpreters, and how do you go about interpreting complex terms or jargon?
Connection must be because I'm traveling. But let me try to see if you can hear me, and if not, I can repeat myself. The recruitment and training of interpreters for the Massachusetts Trial Court is a delicate process. And what I do is, at the beginning, when you have applied to become an interpreter, you need to sit for a 4-hour written exam. The reason for that is because if you cannot write your language, you're not considered bilingual. You may speak a language, but you're not a bilingual individual. So the exam consists of not only terminology, but also translations to make sure that you can
Narda.
We lost you again, Narda. We lost you there towards the end.
So, the training requires the exam that is 4 hours. And after that, if you pass it with an 80 or higher, we have a mandatory 2-day training to introduce you to what court interpreting is. Then we have the mentoring program, which is pairing you with an interpreter that's seasoned, so that that interpreter can walk you through the court system, and in that time introduce you to vocabulary that you may or may not have known, proper way to address the court personnel, the court and LEPs, and also the interpreter's code of conduct. I'm not sure if you were able to hear that.
Yes, we heard it. We did hear it, Narda.
Okay.
Thank you very much for that.
After 2 or 3 years of that, our expectation is that you're able to sit and pass the National Center for State Court certification exam, which will rate the most important modes of interpreting, which is sight translation, consecutive and simultaneous translations in court. And that will let us know that you have the ability to sit at a court event and properly perform your responsibilities as an interpreter.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Narda.
You're welcome.
In regards, can you talk to us a little bit about how we go about translating complex terms and jargon?
The jargons will be called idioms in our field. Idiomatic phrases. We have a translation specialist for the Massachusetts Trial Court. And with that specialist, we have a team of 10 in the team of translators. And we also have probably 15 more who assist those translations in the translation team. And what that specific team is in charge of is translating all of the core personal documents that are used for the public, all of the forms that are used for the public in housing court, probate court, juvenile court, any ordinances that came out of COVID, all of those questions that the public needed to know within the trial court system. We translated all of the answers on the phone lines in the top 10 languages. And for the trial court, the top 10 languages are Spanish, Portuguese, Cape Verdean, Vietnamese, Arabic, Russian, American Sign Language, Mandarin Cantonese, and Haitian Creole. So in those top 10 languages, we had translated all of the COVID questions for those who attend the courts, who will call on Zoom hearings. We have translated all of the instructions on how to log into Zoom for the non-English speaker, and we continue to do so on the forms as well. We started a project of translating and reformatting the language for the housing core forms so that they are able to be read for English and non-English speakers at a more understandable level. And that's a committee that I'm also sit on to make sure that as the forms are being translated, they are translated at a 5th grade level, no higher, so that non-English speakers and English speakers as well can understand the language of the core.
Good. Thank you, Nada.
You're welcome.
So thank you for your testimony, Nada. And so as promised, we have both panels on, and particularly those that have time sensitivities, Yvonne and how, so they were on before 11, and I know that Nada is also traveling. So shifting gears now to colleagues, to their questions, and then I know we have public testimony with the time sensitivity at noon. So I want to I just have 2 brief questions, and that's to the city panel. And it's based on basically what Nada had just alluded to, which was she had talked about idioms, and she also talked about at a 5th grade level. So I guess the question is you know, I guess what levels, you know, what reading comprehension levels are we, the city of Boston, currently providing materials in? And then a specific question to Ms. Wong. It's how do the outline responsibilities in the director of the office align with your current responsibilities? So if Ms. Wong can probably handle both of those, I assume, and then we'll turn it over to lead sponsor and then to colleagues for questions of either of any of the panelists.
Thank you, Councillor Flaherty. So for the level that we advise all departments to create documents in is at an 8th grade reading level. And then we also have a plain language guide that departments can leverage. And we're currently creating a glossary of multilingual terms that can also be shared with interpreters of common terms and names of departments as well. And then for your second question, the responsibilities under the amended language access plan, to me,
How do they align with your current responsibilities?
They aligned pretty well with what my responsibilities are as of now.
Very good. Thank you, Jennifer. Those are my questions, and Chair will turn it over to lead sponsor for questions of the panel, Julia Mejia.
Thank you, Mike. So in terms of just, I'll go really quick. I see Hawa, I'm not sure if Hawa's still with us. So I'm gonna go to Carolyn. I know one of the values of the AARW is adaptation, and I'm curious to know how you all adapt to communities who are not able to read or write, and what kinds of lessons the city can learn from those experiences. And this is more of a request too, but I will would you be able to share your recommendations with us? We will hopefully move into a working session, and we hope to modify this ordinance even further than we have done so already.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the whole API's CAN steering committee would be excited to have a meeting about what we're seeing in Dorchester as well as Chinatown. And yeah, I think that Councilor Mejia, I mean, I can think of more specifics, but I do think it's just doing multiple types of, you know, it's doing written and verbal interpretation. It's doing, you know, different levels. It's having someone actually read what has been the written translation and doing an edit, not just for technical, but for, you know, comprehension. We know in the Vietnamese community here, because folks of when folks came here as refugees, the language is slightly different than maybe a more recent immigrant. So really understanding the population and making sure that folks who have that experience are helping make sure the materials feel right, whether that's, you know, written, spoken, pictures, all of that. So yeah, I think that's really important, the cultural context as well as, you know, the actual technical language. And then just understanding the communities in your neighborhood and who does have more challenges with different types of reading, writing, hearing, whatever the barriers might be, and kind of just, yeah, making sure you have multiple ways you're doing everything.
Thank you, thank you. I really do appreciate the differences. The point about the differences in generations of languages is really important, because I do see that the interrupted education, cultural piece is really crucial. So I really do appreciate you bringing this into the space, and I think the cultural competency clause that we're working on will hopefully address some of them. And my internet is a little bit unstable, so hopefully you all can hear. I'm going to ask my next question to Yvonne, if you're still with us. Yvonne, if you're here, could I see you if you're still here?
Yes, Counselor, I am right here.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit more about services for people who cannot read or write in any language? What kind of services are available to them through LCR? And what can we as the City of Boston learn from your experiences with this group?
Yes, that is one of the most vulnerable populations, of course, Counselor, because we're talking about people who cannot read or write even in their own native language. So not just in English, but individuals who can't read or write in Spanish, for example. I think it is highly important for not just for organizations like Lawyers for Civil Rights, but for city agencies to keep those populations in mind by providing really robust translation support. Before individuals are being told that they have to sign a document, that must be read to them in its entirety. And there could also be other ways of expressing consent, especially these days when we have access to technology. We can record interactions where we are coming into an agreement with somebody and capturing that as oral consent, express consent. And so I think it is important for us to have flexibility in how we structure those transactions. We cannot assume that everybody's just going to be able to look at a document, even if that document is in their native language. And so providing very much individualized support for individuals with robust, comprehensive wraparound translation is critical. And I'm sure there some of the academics that have joined can speak about some of the methodologies inherent in some of that best practices. But for us, from a practical perspective, what we recommend is that individuals should always be assigned an interpreter to be able to have a smooth interaction with the service provider. And this comes up all the time. Right now, we are in the process of providing a representation for somebody who is originally from Vietnam, Vietnamese speaker, currently living in a shelter because she fled an incident of domestic violence with her 2-year-old child. And in order for us to be able to provide meaningful legal support to this client, it is critical for us to have a legally certified translator at every step of the process. Just having somebody who speaks Vietnamese doesn't necessarily guarantee that this individual is going to understand the complexities around the legal issues of domestic violence, of what the obligations are for being able to remain under shelter, for example. Deadlines, critical. If you're moving in court, having an understanding of what the deadlines are and what the judge is expecting you to do is vital. And so having a translator is not enough. We need a legally certified translator in that situation. So I share that just to illustrate how even in situations where we're not talking about literacy, which is the issue that you're raising, we still have to go beyond just having a translator in order to provide services. And so taking that one step further, if we're talking to individuals who present those reading and writing challenges that you're raising, we need to go even more beyond that in order to ensure a full suite of services are available. And it's important to be including that in the budget for the agency. You know, linguistic support is just as important as being able to provide other aspects of support for the service population. So this has to be a commitment that is not just in terms of a policy, but a protocol for how you're going to work with different populations that you interface, and also a budget to support those services.
Thank you for that. And I have one more question, Mike, and then I'll give you back.
I just want to touch. I just want to touch briefly on that, and that is key and important in having a qualified interpreter for doing these things. Depending on the culture, if we have someone who is not an interpreter and properly trained, they will not interpret properly, especially in domestic abuse cases or cases of rape or serious violence. This is the why recruiting proper interpreters and training proper interpreters may take resources, but must be done. I totally agree with what Council just said.
Can I just really quickly, because I love that the professor was piggybacking off of that, and I just want to share one example. It's not just in the domestic violence, but also in complex immigration cases where the difference between being persecuted or not persecuted, and even just in more mundane situations in Suffolk Downs, you're sitting there talking about these complex language of development and redevelopment. Language that maybe even in Spanish, I don't know what that means because it's a term of art. And so when we're talking about the role of the Office of Language and Communications Access, it is precisely that type of language access audit that can be done to make sure that we humanize highly technical terms. And that requires the translation support and resources that the professor was just outlining.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Professor.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. I just have one last question for Jennifer, and thank you again. I'm just curious if you could just talk to us a little bit about your community process. How often do you all interact with the community? How do you communicate their need? How do they communicate their needs? I'm particularly interested in how outreach is done to some of the communities in Boston who speak other languages besides the 5 major ones. And how do you guys keep track of the languages spoken in Boston?
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Before COVID, our office was just integrating that piece of communicating with community-based organizations, and we had outreach fellows that went out into the communities and went and talked with community-based organizations. Now, post-COVID, we are reigniting connecting with community-based organizations, and we just started this recently of individually contacting the community-based organizations on our list and setting up a time to meet with them to have one-on-one conversations, hearing, talking about our office, hearing about their feedback, hearing about their needs. And that is something that we are planning to do over the next few months. And then our goal is to have larger community-based meetings with community-based organizations to hear more of their feedback and have more of like an open meeting. And then to your second question, we gather our data from census data when it comes to creating our demographic reports. That was recently updated. We work in partnership with the BPDA. And I don't want to give you half an answer, but I can actually follow up with all of you with a written document that outlines kind of like how that data is created as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Councilor Mejia. So we're going to go into a round of questionings from our colleagues and then turn it over to public testimony. But I'd be remiss if I should have did this in the opening and just to recognize Anlay for the great work you did with respect to the Trust Act. You worked very closely with the City Council, obviously on behalf of the administration, and there was a lot of sort of 11th hour back and forth, but you played a critical role in its passage, and I'd be remiss if I didn't at least credit you and say thank you on behalf of the council for that. So and on behalf of the residents of the city. So a lot of that stuff behind the scenes work is critical. And you were, I use the term utility infielder, but you were the utility infielder on the Trust Act. And I just wanted to recognize you publicly for that as well. So thank you, Anlay. Chair recognizes our colleague, City Councilor Kenzie Bach.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I gather we're going to talk about the specifics of the legislation in the next working session. Is that accurate?
That would be correct.
Okay, great. So I won't dive in there. But I would love to know, Jennifer, if you could speak a bit to, obviously there were some additional resources for language access in this year's budget. And I'd love to hear how your office is using them and just in general, kind of what the overall blueprint or plan for the existing office's expansion has been, and so that we can sort of start to understand how that dovetails with the things that are proposed in Councilor Mejia's legislation and sort of what things are in the legislation that would go beyond what you guys have been working on so far.
Thank you, Councilor Bach. Thank you very much for the additional funding. The way that we're using this funding is that we provide funding for other departments. Sorry about that. And we use that allocation to continue providing additional funding for departments who have a lot of either COVID-19 related information or programs that are important and vital to support the translation of those documents or to provide interpretation at those events. And then one thing related to our office that we're currently doing is trying to expand the staff capacity and create room for our office to be able to have additional resources so someone can have more. I'm right now currently doing a one-on-one check-in with departments, and we want to have an additional staff member who can also provide a lot of the in-person trainings, create additional resources for departments so that we can ensure internally all departments are prepared and are making their way to knowing language and communication access, are prioritizing it and working closely with them to ensure that we are making the city accessible.
And can you speak a little bit? I mean, I know we have variability across our departments right now in terms of how far along people are on having a sort of thorough language access plan. I have an impression in my head that, for instance, there's still a lot of work to be done on the ISD side. But I just wonder if you could speak a little bit to which departments across the city kind of have the strongest language access provision right now and where you're working more actively to catch up.
So for as of what I'm doing right now, because I'm new in my position, is I've been taking a lot of intentional time to meet with every department and kind of see where they all are when it comes to language access, communicating with their LCA liaisons, making sure that every department is training all their frontline staff. And so what the goal is that hopefully, by the end of the year, we can have everyone on a good foundation to move forward with language access.
Right. I guess I would just say, I do think that I think in figuring out, where we're at and where you need to be with this legislation, we need some kind of assessment of where we are in the different departments. And that's not to criticize anybody. It's just to sort of acknowledge work that needs to be done. So I hope that as you're meeting with everybody, that you're sort of establishing some record of those benchmarks of kind of where we are. And am I right in understanding every department has to designate a language access coordinator, right? Someone who's on staff in the department, or what's that role called? So
it's a language LCA liaison.
But you don't necessarily have to make that a part of anybody's time of their job. Is that right? And what I mean by that is you could take somebody who's got a full-time job in the department and then just designate them the language access liaison.
Yes, that's correct.
Right. So I think that's another thing that we should look at as we talk about this, is just like, nothing gets done unless time is spent on it. That's the other resource besides money that we're talking about here. And yeah, it seems to me like something we should dig into more. Great. Well, I have lots more questions, but I'll save them for the working session. I do think it would be useful in advance of the working session to understand from the administration what aspects of Councilor Mejia's proposed legislation are, consistent with things that you feel like you're doing or are planning to do anyways, and what the resource implications are. Because I think, obviously we want as a council to be more ambitious about this, and I think it is going to mean increased resources, and I think that's what we need in a multilingual city. But we need to be talking about that at a brass tacks level. So, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman.
Very good. Thank you, and great points, Councilor Bork. Chair recognizes Councilor Ed Flynn.
Thank you, Council Flaherty, and again, thank you to the panelists for their informative information and their leadership. And I guess my question is, how do we ensure the quality of interpretation? We currently contract a lot of the interpretation out, I assume, and how do we measure the metrics and the effectiveness of the services they're providing?
I'm not sure if you want me to answer that. This is not, but since you mentioned that you contract out most of your interpreting services, one of the ways to begin assessing what type of interpreters you are receiving is asking for a detailed plan of how those interpreters are recruited, who is the person providing the training, and what experience in interpreting training.
Councilor Flaherty, can you let
Not of the last portion of your answer is you have a tough cell reception there. So if you can you hear us, Nada?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can. So,
very good. You're broken up there. So the last half of your question got cut off. Nada, can you hear us? Nada. Council Flynn, looks like Nada's reception had cut off. I don't see her actually even on the line.
Are you able to hear me now?
Much better, Nada. Perfect. Very good. That's much clearer.
Okay. The person who's providing the training and what type of training and language assessment is used for that agency you're using, where you outsource your interpreting work. That is important. It's important to know what type of language assessment those interpreters that are providing community interpreting receive, to make sure that they are actually interpreters that have the language skills and are truly bilingual to provide those services.
That's good information. Thank you. And I know Councilor Mejia brought that point up. When we have the possibility, if this is passed, that would be critical, working with language access to see how effective these interpreters are in providing services. Are we currently doing that now through the language access department?
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. So, yes, so we do contract out our services. We have a vendor directory, which is public for everyone. And then we also have community-based interpreters. These are interpreters that have been highlighted by other departments that communities, really thought that the quality of the interpretation were high, and request those interpreters. So those are on our list as well. And then right now we're currently working with trying to get community-based organizations that provide translation and translation review services on our vendor directory, so they can be used as well as and leveraged by city departments. So right now we have the Cape Verdean Association as well as the Vietnamese American Civic Association that we're working on, and we're hoping to increase the amount of community-based organizations that we work with as well.
Thank you, Jennifer. My final question, if I may, to Jessica. I have great respect for your department and the work you do. For my constituents, many of them that are immigrants that don't speak English, they also have related disabilities as well. What type of communication, what type of services are you providing, is your department providing, but also working with language access to make sure you're coordinating effectively to make sure that resident gets the same level of basic city services as anybody else?
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. That is a incredibly important constituency that we work actively with LCA and with Moya to try and essentially tackle from all angles. It is depending on the constituency, a nuanced and culturally sensitive challenge based on views of disability, especially with language barriers and things like that. And so we are in constant communication with LCA and with Moya to work to make sure that constituents are handled across sector, to make sure that their needs are met, both on the disability side, on the immigration side, and on the communication access side. So we're constantly looking at better ways and more effective ways to meet the populations. And it's definitely, as is true in disability work, it is not a one-size-fits-all solution. And so we're constantly brainstorming new ways and handling everything by a case-by-case basis when situations arise.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Jennifer, and to the panelists for your work on this important issue. Thank you, Council Flaherty.
Very good. Thank you, Council Flynn. And once again, I was just asked, and I'm going to recognize my colleague, City Councilor Anissa Asabi George, and just asked if we can try to sort of slow it down just a little bit for the interpreter. Just trying to struggle to keep up, but we're doing the best we can, obviously, with what we have. So that said, Chair recognizes Councilor Anissa Asabi George.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. And I just want to thank and be grateful for the depth and nuance in which my colleagues have asked their questions. I don't have additional questions. I have, continue to learn a lot on the work that the administration does and our various departments do to make sure that we're able to connect and communicate with our residents and sort of meet them where they are with their language needs, and improve, continue to work to improve access to city services. So I don't have any questions. I hope that just to continue moving the hearing along, and look forward to the working session where we are discussing specific language amendments. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Councilor Asabi George. Chair recognizes Councilor Michelle Wu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, everyone. I know a lot of folks on this call were involved last time around as well. I'm just curious. I really liked the idea that was mentioned earlier, I think by Ivan, that citywide language and communications access audit would be a really great starting point in terms of consistency. Are there other ideas that you have for, like what's one step that the city could take either in tightening up just to connect the reality of what we're seeing with implementation today with where we could go, either from folks inside the city or those who have interacted with the city a lot? I think we see over and over again, and so many of my colleagues are champions in pointing this out every time, but we just see, even though the commitment's there, even though the office is there, that it's still sometimes, whether capacity-wise or for a different reason, a much more delayed rollout of any multilingual documents and services, and just that the extra steps involved. How do we get it so that it is seamless and from the beginning clear that we have created language access and assistive technology opportunities throughout all of our processes.
Thank you, Councillor Wu. Yes, so the city currently does audits for every department when it comes to language access. And we're currently underway of completing our fiscal year 20 audit. And when it comes to prioritizing language access at the beginning, at the forefront, when it comes to events, translation, we have been creating protocols that outline step-by-step on how departments can take that approach of language access at the beginning, prioritizing language access at the beginning when creating events and content translation. And I would also be happy to share those with you as well.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to jump in?
This is Carolyn, and sorry, I'm going to have to jump off in a minute, so I'll just jump in here. And I just think from the community side and from my experience, I think part of it is just, is investing time and money, as folks have been saying. And I think it's the practice of it, over time, the more you do it, of course, it takes longer. Like that is, that's why folks are resistant to do it, but we know it's so important. And so I think the more we require it and the more it becomes the practice, the more folks will build those timelines in to their work plans. And then it just, it needs adequate funding and staffing time for folks to really have a robust process. And we need to say that, if the translations and interpretations needed have not happened, that we can't move forward. I've been at many things where something's gone wrong with the translation or interpretation, and it's like, well, we just need to plow through, we just need to keep moving. And actually, I think we have to understand that without that, we cannot move forward. And it's a key part of how we move forward. And that we actually have to take the time as a city to get that right as part of any process or service folks are providing.
Thank you. Really, really great point.
Councillor Wu, this is Ivan, and I also have to jump off, and I want to thank you for your leadership and for your question about the language access audits. I think that could be something that becomes more uniform across the board for city agencies. And I really want to underscore what my fellow panelists just mentioned, because we've seen that even within our own work. We've done a lot of work, for example, with the Cambodian American community. And in rolling out community education materials, what we have done is to make sure that we do simultaneous releases in English, Spanish, and Khmer. And that has become part of our culture. And that's not necessarily the way that we used to operate 5 years ago, but certainly we are here now. And so making sure that we can prioritize that with simultaneous releases, and really to underscore what my fellow panelists said about incorporating that within the timeline is critical, because it's a part of making sure that those communities feel heard, feel seen, and are provided with the information at the same time. It's a part of making them whole and having their dignity intact. We saw, with the COVID, of course, we were all struggling, but a lot of the city's material first would come out in English. Right, and so we experienced some delay, which is understandable under the unprecedented circumstances. But I think all of that presents opportunities for being able to do simultaneous releases and rollouts, and for making sure that it's part of the culture. And so uniformity, resources, and language access audits across the board, I think, could go a long way in addressing, Councillor Wu, what you're raising as part of this panel discussion. And I do apologize that I have to drop off, but it's been a pleasure to be here to support the leadership of each of the city councilors who is present for this important discussion.
Thank you so much, Ivan.
And I see my colleague, Councillor Kenzie Bach, has a question, has her hand up is that for Yvonne before he goes?
No, it was just it was a very brief comment on this.
Go ahead, you have the floor.
I was just going to say that exactly what the panelists have talked about. I saw at the Housing Authority when it became required for, every language, every notice that goes out has to be in the language of, any language that clears the 5% of the development bar. and people had to send their notices to the language access department 5 full days in advance of wanting to mail them. It totally backs up the timeline, but very quickly people just learn like, oh, I have to back out that number of days. Like this thing has to hit in the mail this day. That means I need to send it this day. That means I need plus 5 days back to get it translated. I think, and it feels impossible to people the first time if you make them at it when they were trying to do everything just in time. But once it becomes part of the workflow, it's just part of the workflow.
Thank you, Councilor. I see Nagla Abdallah, welcome. And if you have a question of Yvonne, I see that your hand is raised as well.
Thank you for having me. And now it's not for Yvonne, it's for Ms. Wong.
Go ahead, you have the floor briefly, go ahead.
Yeah. So my name is Nagla Abdallah, and I work with Boston Public Schools Office of English Learners. So, and I'm in the Office of English Learners for the Arabic community. So my question is for Ms. Wong. Knowing that there are many dialogues for the Arabic, how will you differentiate between each dialogue? So we know that the Arab community, they come from North Africa, Middle Eastern, East of Africa, and a part of Asia. So some of them, they put their ethnic groups as white, some as Asian, some as African. So what is the population that you can differentiate between each dialogue? So the people are from North Africa, they speak a different dialogue than from Asia and from Africa.
Thank you. Yeah. So for those situations, we always advise departments to ask constituents to figure out what dialogue. We recognize that it's very difficult. There are many, even like with other languages, there are other dialogues. So we always ask to make sure that we are providing access as best as we can.
Okay, thank you. So there is a question like which dialogue that, Arabic dialogue that you speak, so you can provide the service. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Very good. Chair recognizes our colleague, Councilor Liz Braden. Councilor Liz Braden, and see she might be muted. While we wait for Councilor Braden, Councilor O'Malley, Councilor Matt O'Malley, is Councilor O'Malley still with us? Very good. So I'm going to transition now to public testimony, and we have a list of folks who have signed up for testimony. And I see that the list, the first person on the list was obviously Nagla Abdallah. So Nagla, do you have any additional questions? I know that you had asked a question. Do you have any additional questions or comments?
No questions, just the testimony that I already submitted the document to Julia.
Very good. Okay, Catherine Chow. Catherine Chow, she's on CHIU.
Hi, I'm here.
Hi, Catherine. How are you? Welcome, and it's still a good morning. So, good morning to you.
Good morning.
It's good to see you.
Thank
If
you.
you could just identify yourself for the record, any affiliation that you may have, and you have the floor to offer a comment or a question.
Okay. My name is Catherine True, and I am the guidance director for the Boston Public Schools. And I want to just really offer my support for this this initiative and to encourage just the very public setting of the expectations. I want to thank Councillor Flynn as well as all the city councilors who are on here. I think the last school committee meeting was just a very clear example of, while there are intentions, just helping people understand how to do this in a respectful way. There were translators at the school committee hearing, the school committee meeting last Wednesday, but only for the public comment. And so the translators were on the entire time, but they didn't translate the meeting. And now that all of us are so much used to doing Zoom makes it actually very easy. You don't need any additional tools as long as you have a translator, and that they just have to click on interpretation. Just like right now, if I wanted to switch to the Chinese channel, I click on the little icon for interpretation. There is an interpreter on there who has asked us all to slow down. And it's not like you have to get the headsets. Everybody has their little cell phones. And so I just really want to encourage sort of the publicizing of who we serve. This is part of providing quality service. And so I think having this come from City Hall and from the City Council and sending the message to everybody, this is a part of providing good quality service. And then the last thing I did want to just address, because the group did spend really interesting time sharing about the background and the translators, there should be a mechanism to provide feedback. I have heard from families that whoever was hired as the translator for the Chinese translation for the Boston Public Schools hasn't provided good quality translation. And there needs to be a feedback loop so that that can be acted upon, because when a family member gives that feedback and the same translator is hired again, the family feels very disrespected. So
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine.
I think
Diana?
if I can just say something brief, one thing we need to keep in mind is that a translator is a skilled interpreter or professional. So we have to know the difference between the two, because if we are requesting translators and they are translators of written material, a translator is not always an interpreter or
Nada, you broke up again.
there's a
You broke up towards the end again. Nada, you broke up again towards the end.
So okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, that's much better.
Okay, so the difference between a translator and an interpreter is that a translator is in writing, an interpreter is oral form. So in requesting the two, we need to know which is the one we're requesting for community events or a school event or any other event that needs an interpreter services. Are you requesting an interpreter for an event that's up, so you need a real-time oral interpreter, or are you requesting a translator who will be doing side translation of documents or doing translations in writing?
Very good. Good point. Appreciate that. Diana Santiago from the Massachusetts
Recruiting.
Massachusetts Advocacy for Children.
Excuse me, Counselor. Clarity, just a quick question. Are we going to do a second round, or we just moving?
Yes, yep. We're going to get through the public testimony, and then we're going to go back for another round of the panelists. It's important, obviously, for the panelists to hear some of the public testimony as well. So try to include all of that. So Diana, if you're available, if you can identify yourself. Hi, Diana.
Yes. Hi.
Good
My name is
morning. Good
Diana
to see you.
Santiago. Good morning. Good morning.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm a senior attorney at Massachusetts Advocates for Children, or MAC, which is a private nonprofit organization with the mission of removing barriers to educational and life opportunities for children and youth. At MAC, I lead MAC Proyecto Acceso a la Educación Especial, which is a project that focuses on special education advocacy on behalf of low-income, primarily Spanish-speaking parents in Boston and surrounding cities and towns. So first and foremost, I want to thank Councillor Mejia for your thoughtful advocacy on language access issues, which is reflected in the amendments to the current ordinance. And of course, thank you to all of the city council members for the opportunity to provide testimony here. So under federal and state law, parents of children who receive special education services are afforded explicit language access protections. But unfortunately, I see on a very regular basis that that is not enough. Although nearly 50% of Boston Public Schools students' first language is not English, BPS, among other school districts, is often not compliant with these laws. So I have some examples which reflect the widespread denial of equal educational opportunity for children whose parents' primary language is not English. In special education, initial and continued determination of a child's need for services is based almost entirely on psychological, educational, and other assessments completed by school districts. So these reports are frequently not translated into the parent's primary language by BPS. Where parents are effective in advocating for translated reports, the reports are typically provided late in violation of timelines required by federal and state law. So this has real implications for students with disabilities, can result in substantial delays in providing special education services that are really crucial to a child's learning and development. MAC has also worked with limited English proficient parents of BPS students who are involved in disciplinary proceedings, who are asked to sign documents in English, indicating their understanding of decisions taken by BPS in relation to their child's school suspension. Parents' frustrations over non-compliance with laws requiring primary language interpretation and translation have only been amplified during this time of remote learning due to COVID. So now the frequently hard to obtain interpretation and translation are an absolute necessity for parents seeking to support their children with disabilities with remote learning and understanding all of the changes required for the limited in-person options that are being offered for students, including students with disabilities. So these problems persist despite complaints that my organization, MAC, and others have filed with the State Department of Education. MAC offered testimony in support of the existing ordinance 4 years ago. And at the time, we highlighted the need for city agency plans, including those developed by Boston Public Schools to be made available to the public for comment prior to approval, so that parents and others can provide input. In addition, MAC highlighted the need to hold annual hearings to get input from the public about the plans that have been submitted. The proposed amendments to the ordinance proposed by Councillor Mejia are expressly designed to accomplish the goals of ensuring that the plans take into account the experiences of Boston residents who rely on interpretation and translation services, including the residents who face literacy barriers and communication barriers due to disability. So for all of these reasons, I urge the City Council to pass this critically important ordinance and to prioritize its implementation through adequate funding. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Diana. Thank you. Wendy Liang, is Wendy Lang on? Liang? L-I-A-N-G.
Yes. I'm
Wendy,
here.
am I pronouncing your name correctly, Wendy?
Yes.
Welcome to the Boston City Council hearing, and you have the floor. If you could just introduce yourself in any affiliation that you may have.
我可以講中文係嘛？我可以講係嘛？我就係一個家長喺波士頓，咁咧就我有即係有啲問題都講下。咁因為我女之前係就喺波士頓公路校嗰度，咁咧我就反映啲翻譯咁啦。咁即係好多年一直咁樣從公路學校嗰度反映啲翻譯問題。
Wendy，你方面慢啲啊？
OK，
Hi.
好好好。
So I am a BPS student. I have a daughter who's in the BPS system with special needs. For many, many years, I have escalated and reflected my concerns with the quality of interpretation to Boston Public Schools.
Yeah， 特別喺波士頓學校即係開嗰啲 IEP 嘅會嗰陣時咧，咁樣咧就一開始我
Especially for IEP meetings that take place within Boston Public School.
佢哋波士頓學校咧提供啲翻譯咧，咁咧就即係我哋啲家長唔明白，咁你梗係要即係起碼開會咁你要講明即係前因後果咁，但係我哋聽到咧就一嚿雲都唔知佢前邊講啲乜。
So for a lot of us who do not understand and we rely on our interpreter, we have to take the time to explain sort of the before and after of the events. However, the interpretation that has been rendered by a lot of the BPS interpreters make us more confused when we walk out of the meeting.
咁你起碼都要講得我哋啲家長明白，因為我哋啲英文又唔好啦嘛，咁啊即係依賴啲翻譯，但係佢講得我哋唔明白。
Because we rely on our interpreters, the very least, the interpreter should be able to provide understandable interpretation. However, many of us parents, we walk out of the meeting feeling more confused.
咁你要講明白，咁我哋先知道自己啲仔女喺學校嗰度有啲咩需要，有發生啲咩事咁樣，咁你翻譯得唔清唔楚，我哋又唔知咩回事咁，即係。
When interpretation is not rendered properly, we are more confused, and we rely on interpreters to relate to us the needs of our children in school and the appropriate services that the school would be providing or that our children are needing.
即係咁樣，你浪費咗我哋啲家長去點樣去了解啲細路仔，同埋點樣去幫助佢，咁樣。
It's a waste of time for a lot of our parents because we're not able to understand the needs of our children, and we're furthermore not able to assist our children in accessing services.
同埋咧，你學校咧唔會話去關心你明唔明白總之就開咗1個鐘頭俾你嗰個會，你明白唔明白佢都唔會話再幫你話下次再話約個好啲嘅翻譯。
And BPS is not concerned whether parents are able to understand or access the meeting. All they care about is that they meet the minimum requirement of hosting the meeting, which requires an hour. And if a parent does not understand what went on during the meeting, there are no follow-up.
咁我哋都同公立學校嗰度提意見，1年又1年1次又1次咁樣要求啲質量好嘅翻譯，佢哋。
We have raised this concern to the Boston Public School time after time, years after years, that we request for qualified and quality interpreters. However, BPS ignored us.
同埋即係我認為即係 IEP 嗰啲 meeting 都好重要，但係咧佢哋次次揾嗰啲翻譯咧。 咁有時我哋問佢，你哋有冇幫 IEP 翻譯過？咁佢哋冇㗎，第一次咁我都唔知 IEP 係乜嚟嘅，咁樣我自己你都唔明白，咁點樣去幫我哋翻譯，令到我哋啲家長明白咧？
IEP meetings are absolutely critical, and when we ask the interpreter who are sent to the meetings whether they have had any experience interpreting for IEP meetings before, many of them will say no, and they do not even understand what an IEP is. So if an interpreter is not able to have full access or understanding of IEPs or IEP meetings, how are they then able to interpret for us parents?
同埋即係一直到現在，即係我一直由3年級至到而家個女10年級，我經歷咗好多佢嗰啲翻譯都係學校推，每一次都係要推嘅，最後咧
So
就係
my daughter, ever since my daughter was in 3rd grade and she is currently in 10th grade, every time I have to push, I have to request for interpreters. And ultimately at the end,
但係好彩我都有最關鍵嗰年5年級升去6年級嗰個最關鍵嗰個時期揾到，好似現在呢個翻譯 Marisa Low 幫我翻譯到我最明白，要求到先要爭取到我嘅權利。
But I was fortunate enough during my daughter's 5th grade year, which was really critical. And between 5th grade to 6th grade, I was able to have access to a professional interpreter. And we were able to access the appropriate rights that my daughter deserves.
但係現在即係到咗現在咧，我要求每一次嘅開會 IEP meeting， 我都係要求佢揾一個即係嘅質量好啲，等我明白有辦法明白前因後果嘅 meeting 嘅開會。但係咧，每一次公立學校提供嘅咧，都係話我提供咗好質量啊，但係每一次嘅質量都係冇辦法明白到全一個會議嘅意思嘅。
Even now, I would ask the Boston Public School to provide a qualified interpreter who can render quality interpretation so I can understand the entirety of the IEP meeting. And every time BPS would vouch that the interpreters they have contracted a qualified interpreter who can provide quality interpretation. But I am still left with the same frustration and helplessness, which is I am unable to understand and access the IEP meeting.
所以咧，我就係話想即係每一次佢公立學校咧，佢就都話我哋會揾啲好質量，同埋佢啲揾嗰啲公司，我唔知佢啲咩公司，外判公司已經係好好噶啦。咁你認為今個公司唔好，我幫你再揾下一個公司嘅，佢真係咁樣，次次都係咁樣，所以我就係即係唔明白你哋公立學校揾啲咩公司，次次啲公司都話好過呢個公司，但係次次都係一個差過一個，差唔多。
So every time I provide feedback, BPS would promise that, if interpretation is poor this time, we will try to contract with another interpretation agency. I can guarantee the next agency, they would have better interpreters. However, each time the interpretation is just worse. So I don't know what kind of interpretation agency the Boston Public School contracts with, because they just get worse and worse.
唔止話 IEP meeting 啦，其他有好多會議，我哋啲家長都好想去參加，即係有關嗰啲啲學校嗰啲會議，我哋個個都好想參加。但係咧，每一次我哋參加去聽嘅時候，每一次我哋都要求啲翻譯即係做足啲，但係每一次我哋都係聽到一嚿雲，所以咧對到我哋啲家長都好冇信心，好傷心呢件事。
And not only IEP meetings, a lot of us parents really want to participate in meetings across the board hosted by the Boston Public Schools. And it's the same phenomenons in those meetings. We would emphasize to BPS that they should and need to hire quality or qualified interpreters. And every time we leave the meeting feeling more confused than ever, we just feel really heartbroken and we feel very disappointed.
Thank you, Wendy and Melissa. That's a solvable problem. So, we'll deal with that with the lead sponsor, and Boston City Council will address that with Boston Public Schools. So it goes to the crux to what Yvonne and Narda were saying in terms of the quality of the interpreter and the depth of their experience, as well as being able to relay the appropriate information so that no one is feeling left out of the process and or worse, more confused, after they leave the hearing. So thank you, Wendy, for your testimony, and we are committed to addressing that, working with the administration and BPS to right the ship with respect to the quality of the interpretation services and the notices that you guys are currently receiving. So I think that's the crux of why our colleague has filed this, and we need to get to the bottom of that so that you have better experiences, not just you, but everyone that's accessing these services across our city as it pertains not just to the Boston Public Schools, but every basic city service. So thank you for that. And I know Lily Guam is on. Lily, can you hear us?
咁好啦，Wendy， 好多謝你啱啱嗰個建議啦。咁我哋會確保我哋嘅即係話有關部門係會同波士公立學校即係話正視呢個問題。咁我哋咧就會確保所有人同埋所有部門都會去優先呢個即係話有高質量嘅翻譯服務，咁跟住令到所有人都可以公平公正咁樣去參與，咁咧亦都唔會好似你咁樣聽完一嚿雲。咁好啦，咁下一位我哋想請阿 Lily， 唔該 Lily。Lily 你喺度嘛 ？Lily。Lily
Guan。
關 Lily。
She's muted.
Lily 你好。
你 unmute her。
你而家靜咗音啊？你可唔可以我哋要幫你開翻咪下。
Lily, after Lily, we have just like Kai Zhao Chen. Kai Zhao Chen, if Kai Zhao Chen is available.
Kai Zhao 陳姓陳嘅陳 Kai Zhao， 請問你準備好未？
我 OK 啦，我喺度啊。
I'm ready.
Kai
I'm here.
Welcome and still morning. Good morning, Kai Zhao. You have the floor.
Yeah, good morning. Give me a second. 我而家要講個public meeting， 你叫我估入佢，我要講日出嚟。Yeah, since hello.
Hello, Jargon.
Is that okay?
Kai Zhao, yep.
Hello. Yeah, I'm here. I'm here. Sorry. Yeah. Let me get the page I would like to say. Okay.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, I thank you everyone here to make the great effort for working to turn on the access for the for the access for the one who are not speak and read English, especially thank Councillor Edward Flynn and his team to help Chinatown residents and the residents in Boston, and thank all the city councilors. Thank you for all of your hard work. And I'm going to say, yeah, since communication is most important part for everyone in our society, and also is a basic foundation for transmitting and receiving information, we should work all together to raise our generation. Every family should be counted. So live and learn, never too late. So families should be access to associate the processing of our community and neighborhood. They should know what's going on in their life. The more we know, the more we help. Since we are the one in our society, everyone should be counted. So education is a bright future, spirit, virtue of heritage, and the central of human and nature. So my grandfather is a person who read newspaper every day. He had idea, he solved the problem efficiently, and he taught in our daily life. He transmits his philosophy in a simple sentence when every time I have questions, so that I know everyone is smart. I remember every sentence at the point to use in my daily life. So every view is the strength for me to go far. His word, like the seed, it plants into my heart and grows day by day. I am so glad I have very smart grandfather. Although life is tough, my grandfather shaped my mind is more tough. So I believe love is the power. So every family should have a chance to shape our future. Every voice should be heard. The more we communicate, the more we get together stronger. So thank you, everyone.
Very, very well. Kai Zhao Chen, thank you for participating. I had mentioned earlier, there's a hard stop from the administration. So unless the lead sponsor has any additional question from administration officials, they have a hard stop at 12, and it's just about 12 right now, 12:01.
Yes, I did have a question. So Councilor Flaherty, I do appreciate you entertaining it. And I just first, before I ask, I just want to thank all of the testimony, our public hearing speakers. Having worked in the education space, the issue that I just heard in terms of the IEP translation is not an easy fix. I've been hearing that same issue for the last 6 years when I was doing parent advocacy. And the fact of the matter is that in order for us to really address this issue, that we're going to need the political will and the budget to reflect that in order to help support BPS, ensure that families are able to get what they need. So I do have a question specifically for the city. I'm just curious that it seems like the council is not a department that is supported by the city, I think. And I've just, I'm just curious about if they cannot support the central staff because it's a quasi agency or it's non-departmental. Can you just help us understand why central staff isn't able to get support services?
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. I can definitely touch base back with you. As I am new in my position, I'm not really sure why, but I can do some research and then bring that information back to you.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I'm also just curious, I know that for this particular hearing, we had interpretation just in Chinese and Cantonese, and I'm just curious about other languages and the role that your department with the right capacity can help play in helping us address some of our interpretation and translation concerns. Just something to think about.
Do you mean as in what other interpreters we have that could be leveraged?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I would be happy to share with you. We have a vendor director, and then we also have community-based interpreters that we've used before in the past for our a lot of our sessions that we help support other departments with, and I can share with you a list.
And I also just wanted to say that Jennifer, your department is like incredibly helpful to our office. And I know we asked a lot of questions here, but I know and just recognize that I see how hard you all are working to ensure that our constituents are able to get what they need when they need it in a way that they can understand it. And so trust that your efforts do not go unnoticed. And this particular hearing and ordinance and what we're trying to do is to provide you with the tools and resources that you need so that your department can grow and expand and so that we can serve the emerging immigrant communities that exist here in the city of Boston. And I hope you recognize that this is in partnership with you and your administration, and we're here to work in collaboration. And so I'm really grateful for not only your participation, but that you stayed here throughout the entire hearing, which speaks volumes to your commitment to this work. So I just wanted to thank you and the administration for your full participation and your ongoing support to our office in particular in helping our most vulnerable immigrants. So thank you, Jennifer, to you and your team.
Very good. So I want to thank the administration as well, and also Fernando Ortiz. I assume he's going to stick with us. We just have one more public testimony. I'm going to recognize Nagla Abdallah. She has her hand raised, and then we're going to go to Jenny Z, and that will conclude public testimony, and then allow our colleagues to have any wrap-up thoughts. So Nagla Abdallah, I appreciate your patience. I know that you've spoken already, but we'll recognize you again.
Thank you very much for giving me the chance. This time, I just want to give my strong support to the Arabic language. I'm a resident of a parent. I'm a resident of Boston and a parent of 3 children at Boston Public Schools. As we all know, Arabic is a South and Central Semitic language spoken in most parts of the Middle Eastern and North Africa, globally spoken by 420 million people and considered one of the 5 spoken languages in the world. After this short introduction, I would like to give another fact that in Massachusetts, the Arabic-speaking population, as per the census of 2010, it was 65,000, but it had increased significantly recently to 175,000 as per the Arab American Institution. Currently, we have 550 active Arabic students in Boston Public Schools. Historically, when people migrated from dictatorship countries, they often tend to fear experiencing their hopes and aspiration in the government's hands. They usually do not speak for what they need, and that is why I am doing this on their behalf. Understandably, I felt the same pattern when I moved to the US in 2016. I did not mention in the registration application for the schools that my first language was Arabic. They ended putting my kids with the native language speakers. What happened to them that my kids were bullied, they lost confidence, and there was no help or support for them. I suffered from a limited ability to understand English. I was lucky to put myself in the education system and educate myself. I strive to educate other parents, as there is no need for parents to suffer from not speaking or understanding the English language. When COVID-19 pandemic started, all the awareness flyers from the city of Boston to schools, building, and families, they were in English and some other language, not in Arabic or Somali. I had sent an email to our superintendent, Dr. Brenda Casilius, to inform her that some important language were missing. With immediate effect, I was connected with Moya. COVID-19 had affected all the communities, including Arabic speaking and Somalis, not only English speaker. In that, there is a need not only for the information to be translated and interpreted, but the information also to be conveyed culturally sensitive in a way that reflects its audience. Therefore, I heartily support the idea of establishing a language and communication access plan for the City of Boston departments, accommodating individuals who speak the language other than English. And also I support the re-evaluate and strengthen the ordinance with the community-centered approach. It is a time for City of Boston and all officials to include the Arabic language and all other language in all their communications, as well as for justice and racial equity. And by meaning that, even especially the Boston Public Schools, they do not in their all communications, the messages, the voice messages, and all the presentations, and especially in the school committee. So we need representation from all the speaking language to be represented in these meetings. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nagla. Jenny Z, is Jenny on? And Melissa, can you stay with us?
Hi, this is June C. I can speak English and
June C. I'm sorry, I had you down as Jenny. Is June C?
So I'm a
Jenny Xia. 點解輪到我冇人？
Is Jenny or June Xie?
All right, so we're gonna in order of arrival. So we're gonna have Jenny. Jenny will go first, and then
Okay.
June will go second.
Okay.
Jenny, you have the floor. Melissa, do you have to interpret here? Jenny,
Hello?
can you hear? Jenny, you've been unmuted. You can speak.
Okay. I need interpreter. Okay.
Very good. Yeah, Melissa, are you on? Melissa,
I'm
you've been
on.
unmuted.
Yes.
Can you hear me,
Yes.
Melissa?
Yes, Chair Flaherty, I'm on.
係，我係昆士學校嘅家長，係 Boston 嘅家長。
I'm a parent of the Josiah Quincy School. I'm a parent of Boston Public School.
我哋自從小朋友入咗昆士小學之後，參加學校家長會嘅任何會議，甚至係 Welcome Centre 嗰個 D 力嘅會議。
Ever since my children became Boston Public School students, in every meeting, from school site council to meetings sponsored by the ELL department, the ELAC meetings.
你哋請返嚟嗰啲翻譯全部唔專業，有口音，同我講
The
嘢
interpreters that you hired are all unprofessional. They do not deliver a complete and professional rendition.
唔可以將我哋家長所表達嘅意思講出嚟。
They are unable to fully render a complete interpretation of what is expressed by us parents.
我哋所表達嘅語言講出嚟，係要學校點樣去幫助我哋家長、我哋華人表達嘅心聲，希望佢
We
哋
need an interpreter that is able to professionally interpret the very message that is on our heart and on our mind from us Chinese parents.
正因為佢哋請嗰啲翻譯唔夠專業，翻譯唔到我哋所表達嘅意思。
Because the interpreters that BPS hires are not professional. They're not able to professionally interpret the meaning of what we would like to express.
所以唔可以表達我哋家長強烈嘅意願同埋嘅聲音。
We're not able to express our strong personal and political view as well as represent our voice.
你哋公立學校搶嗰啲唔夠專業嘅翻譯，係咪種族歧視我哋華人家長唔識英文？
The fact that Boston Public School has hired unprofessional interpreters historically, is this an active and intentional act of racism against Chinese?
佢哋覺得我哋唔可以表達咁正確嘅思維、咁好嘅構思，表達我哋所有嘅質素，唔想聽到我哋家長真正嘅意願，係咪咁樣？你哋公立學校請嗰啲唔專業嘅翻譯人員，係咪咁樣咧？我就想
Are there intentions and reasons behind Boston Public School in the inability and unwillingness to hire professional interpreters? Is it that they are not interested and that they have preconceived ideas and notions that immigrants and Chinese parents are not intelligent enough and that they do not wish to hear what we have to say, which would be relevant?
我哋要嘅翻譯好似依家現在翻譯嗰個 Melissa 翻譯出我哋所表達一模一樣，原汁原味，表達我哋嘅方法係一樣嘅，唔會食晒我哋講啲嘢啦，表達唔出我哋意思，要向上發表意見嘅。咁好似我哋講嘅嘢都冇用嘅。
An interpreter that is able to fully render our message, such as the current one, and that the interpreter would not omit, would not add to, and would not neglect parts of our speech.
有時我哋表達嗰啲嘢，我哋要希望翻譯人員將我哋表達嘅意思原汁原味咁樣講出我哋嘅需求，咁先係幫咗我哋翻譯。
Interpreters who are able to fully, completely interpret the message, the feelings in our message, in order for that to be effective and meaningful.
如果你哋明白我哋講嗰啲中文，如果你係識我哋嘅中文語言，知道我哋講嗰啲有思維、有構思、有質量嘅，你哋要翻譯出一模一樣嘅表達我哋嘅心聲，同埋我哋要你哋翻譯人員做到嘅係表達我哋嘅一樣，達到我哋家長嘅基本水平，我哋嘅心聲，我哋嘅需求。希望你哋將我哋表達。
Interpreters to be able to match the intelligence, the logic the rationale and the internationality of what is being expressed and spoken in our native Chinese.
正因為你哋一直以嚟忽略咗、疏忽咗我哋唐人華人家長唔識英文，所以我哋冇辦法去參加嘅任何會議，對我哋華人家長
Because you have neglected and taken advantage of the fact that Chinese parents are not English proficient, and therefore these are barriers and deterrents for Chinese parents to participate in public meetings, which in turn violate our rights to participate and access public processes.
所以我哋希望你哋非常關注呢個翻譯專業人員，好似依家 Melissa 要翻譯到我哋一樣原汁原味嘅意思，表達我哋嘅一模一樣嘅心聲，要將個心聲帶出去，俾你哋要知道我哋家長嘅需求同家長嘅心聲。
Therefore, we need interpreters who are able to competently, completely, fully interpret the urgency of our messages, such as the one now.
點解有咁專業嘅翻譯人員，你哋公立學校唔邀請，邀請咗其他嗰啲唔專業，食晒我哋家長所講嘅嘢，都表達唔到我哋嘅意思，咁我哋去開會。
Why is it that there are professional interpreters out there and available? However, BPS do not intentionally or make the effort to hire professional interpreters, but instead hire unprofessional and unqualified interpreters who are not able to fully interpret our messages, but only partially.
到目前為止，你哋公立學校仍然未解決到呢個咁嚴重嘅 problem， 因為我哋冇
To
辦
this
法
day,
將我哋嘅
BPS
心
has not been able to resolve this really critical issue, and therefore many of us parents are not able to fully access or communicate with about key decisions.
有時我哋覺得好無奈，因為我哋表達嘅意思，翻譯人員冇辦法將我哋嘅心聲原汁原味咁表達出去，所以對我哋
Many
華人家
times
長好
we
唔
feel
公平。
completely helpless, and we feel it's an issue of inequity when interpreters are not able to fully grasp or render a complete rendition of our thoughts and our ideas.
我哋係要公平、公正、均等嘅，有機會發出我哋嘅心聲嘅，呢啲就係我哋華人家長嘅心聲，所以希望你哋
We deserve equity, we deserve fairness, and we deserve justice. We, the Chinese community and Chinese parents, deserve to be heard.
每一次開會嘅會議都係請嗰啲唔專業，係咪想我哋華人家長唔需要參加，唔需要將我哋嘅心聲發表出去呢？我就想問下，係咪有咁嘅意思呢？
Every time you hire interpreters who are not professional, is it because BPS is not interested in hearing what immigrant communities, what Chinese parents have to say?
我哋就係想要表達我哋想要真正表達嘅意思，希望你哋公立學校要專注非常專注呢個問題，咁我哋華人先可以參加任何嘅會議，發表我哋嘅聲音，將我哋嘅信息帶出去，係代表我哋嘅華人社區係要你哋公立學校要非常專注呢個問題。希望以後每一次嘅會議要請好似 Melissa 咁專業翻譯 professional 嘅專業人員幫我哋做翻譯，我哋就係最好嘅要求，希望你哋做到啦。
We need going forward, we need BPS to hire professional, proficient, qualified interpreters, such as the one now, in order for us to have full equal access. Thank you.
好多謝你哋今次聽我哋家長所表達嘅意思同埋心聲，多謝大家。
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to parents' concern and taking the time to allow us to provide this testimony. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Melissa. And then June, can you hear us, June? I'm going to unmute June. Okay. Welcome, June. Good afternoon. You have the floor.
Thank you. You hear me well, correct?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly clear.
Okay, perfect. So I'm a parent of kids attending Boston Public Schools, BPS. So I have also attended a couple of BPS public meetings recently. Seeing the interpretation services there, I fully understand the frustrations from the Chinese speaking parents community. But I think the good news is we were talking about this issue now, and we have a good plan on the table. Thanks so much for all the counselors for your hard work and commitment. I work in a university in the Boston area, managing a portfolio of bilingual programs. So at work, I get to work with a lot of interpreters and translators and the related work processes. So here I would like to offer some thoughts as you think about how to execute the plan. I have to recognize it is a huge plan, a big project to be implemented. And first of all, I think we really need in-house experts on staff and full-time in the Office of the Language and Communication Access. By expert, I mean the people who understand how interpretation and translation works. And for each language that we're supposed to provide services for, you would want to have at least one expert on staff. And it may be already the case in the current office setup, but as you expand the office and hire more staff, this is something I highly recommend to keep in mind. And candidates could be practitioners from the interpretation and translation industry. For example, someone who've done simultaneous interpretations extensively in the market. They have the professional network. When it comes to recruit qualified interpreters, they have, the people that they already know, and they will understand how to assess interpreters' competencies. You may also find talents from some schools across the US who offer programs to train interpreters and translators. For example, school in the West Coast that's called Middlebury Institute of International Studies, formerly known as the Monterey School of Interpretation and Translation. So ask for referrals from their alumni network, and also ask for referrals from our current experts. For example, one of the panelists that just spoke about the differences between interpretation and translation, and maybe ask referrals from the community, which you are doing already. I think it's necessary when it comes to some less common languages. So all in all, with the expertise in-house, the Language and Communication Access Office would be more competent in recruiting qualified interpreters, translators, and then better assess their performance down the road. And with this expert team, the office will be able to offer trainings to the various departments across the city so that they can implement best practices going forward for more sustainable language support services across the city. That's all I wanted to share. Thanks so much.
Very good, June. Thank you for your public testimony. Is anyone else wishing to offer a public testimony? They may do so now. I'm looking at the attendee list. I have Mark Liu, Mark from CPA. So Mark, you're on, you have the floor.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, perfectly clear.
Hi, thank you, Councillor Flaherty and all the councillors for taking up this important issue. It's of utmost importance for our community and for democracy. I'll try to keep this brief since I think a lot of other folks have already made some really good points. But this is so important, especially based on the moment we are in, dealing with the pandemic, providing culturally appropriate outreach and in language services for things like testing, food services, small business assistance, and rental relief has been critically important. We saw in our work on helping folks with the payroll protection program for small businesses, how fast that money went, and without, and primarily people didn't have access to any interpretation and languages services for that. So a lot of Chinatown businesses missed out on it, and wasn't without some really strong efforts by some community groups to be able to get folks some information to be able to apply for those, that we were to get some money for the community. But that's just one example, I think, where language access was critically important for accessing government services. And I know the issue around interpretation around the BPS hearings and exam testing has been brought up and has been, which has been really important. I think the other aspect I want to point out about that is it's really important to have accurate and fair, good information coming from the city of Boston. There's a lot of misinformation on social media, and so a lot of people had a lot of bad information about it, and was acting on a lot of fear based off of that. People thought the test was going to be permanent, and a lot of people didn't understand the proposal. And so I think more than ever, with what's going on in the world and with social media, getting folks good information, especially in their language that's clear, is super important. And finally, I just want to point out this is an important argument for data equity and data disaggregation. Collecting data not on just race, but ethnicity and language helps us better serve our residents. And again, thank you for taking this issue on, and really glad to keep in contact and having conversations about this.
Good. Thank you for your testimony, Mark. And if there's anyone else wishing to offer public testimony from the group of attendees, they may do so now or forever hold their peace. I'm not seeing any indication to that effect. So at that point, in conclusion, we are closing in on the 12:30 hour. So the hearing has been two and a half hours. And I know we had a couple of hard stops along the way. So I'll throw it over to colleagues just for at least the lead sponsor for the final comment. Also, Councilor Braden, I know that Councilor Braden was on. We had offered her an opportunity to speak earlier, and she was not able to do so. So if Councilor Braden doesn't have anything additional, I'm going to turn it over to lead sponsor to close us out, Councilor Juliet Mejia. You have the floor, Julia.
Okay, so Councilor Braden is not gonna, okay. Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. Having this public hearing, really do appreciate you doing so. And also just wanted to thank all of the advocates and those who are doing the work and living the realities for their heartfelt testimonies, and more importantly, some really great ideas that came out of this conversation. Looking forward to the next step in terms of bringing this into a working session so that we can unpack some of these ideas further. Looking forward to my colleagues' involvement in that process. And thank you again to all who participated. And a big shout out to my policy director of communication and policy, Jacob DeBilcourt, who has been relentless on organizing this effort and not just making sure that people show up, but really leading the charge and making sure that we have all of the right language literally in place for this. He's just done an incredible job in putting this together. So just want to give a quick shout out to Jacob for all your hard work.
Very good. Thank you, Julian. Thank you, obviously, as the lead sponsor. Thank all of my colleagues for attending, also for the great work on the original ordinance from Councilor Wu and former Councilor Tim McCarthy, and also to the administration, to the panelists for their time, attention, and their talents and experience. And with respect to Docket 1041, an ordinance amending City of Boston Code, Ordinances Chapter 6, Section 6-10, language and community access for city services. The committee hearing will be, for the Government Operations Committee, will be adjourned. Thank you all for attending and have a great day.
Make sure you gavel us out.
How's that?
Thank you.
Good work.
Thank you.
See you guys. See you, Councilor Flynn.